Welcome, dear listeners. You are listening to the DigiCompetenz podcast with Anne Quirk and Philip Ramin.
Yes, and today we're speaking to Dr. Frederik G. Pferdt. He was Google's first and former chief innovation evangelist. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford University, a future optimist, and an author. Frederik has shaped the most fabled creative cultures in the world as Google's first chief innovation evangelist. He founded Google's Innovation Lab, where he trained tens of thousands of Googlers to develop and experiment with new ideas, and taught groundbreaking classes on innovation and creativity at Stanford University for more than a decade. As a global thought leader, Frederik has built and trained communities of innovation catalysts, ambassadors, and coaches for organizations including Adidas, Uber, Bayer, Daimler, the FBI, the German Soccer Association, Lufthansa, NASA, the NBA, SAP, Seoul Digital Forum, and governments from more than 25 countries around the world. With his award-winning approach, he served as an innovation consultant to the United Nations and is a member of the Hall of Fame at Paderborn University. His work has been highlighted in more than 250 media outlets like Fast Company, Harvard Business Manager, Spiegel, and BBC News. Focus magazine said about Frederik, "Creativity is like a delicate plant. This German makes it bloom." Frederik's latest book, which will be released on June the 18th, What's Next is Now, How to Live Future Ready, delves into the topic of how to invent a better future. A few fun facts about Frederik. He was born near Lake Constance in Germany and educated in Germany, Shanghai, Cape Town, California, Buenos Aires, and New York. And he currently lives a nature-centric lifestyle above Silicon Valley in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where he draws inspiration from the playfulness and explorer mindsets of his 3 children. He lives off the grid, there with his own water system, and plants his own food. As a child, nobody would believe it, but Frederik was shy. Frederik loves cooking. In fact, originally he thought he might become a chef. Although Frederik is known for doing things only once, he made a great exception to this rule and married his wife in total 3 times. Once on an island, once at home, and at Burning Man. He also does things really thoroughly. For example, he got sick in one of his own classes once and had to leave to throw up. It was on entrepreneurship at Cape Horn. During a social year, he was probably the fastest food delivery man to elderly people with Alzheimer's. And Frederik worked 10 to 12 hours shifts, 7 days a week at a paper factory to make enough money to visit California. Together with his wife, he founded and runs a children's charity called Tüftelei. And according to Frederik, the most difficult and the most rewarding thing he ever did was sitting still 10 hours a day for 10 days straight on a small cushion without talking, reading, or writing in the desert near Joshua Tree in California. Welcome to the podcast, Frederik.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you. Thanks, Philip, as well. Super glad that I can be with you today.
Pleasure.
Well, Frederik, we're really glad to. And let's start with the very best news. In this podcast, you don't have to sit still and you're allowed to talk. So we're really looking forward to moving on with that. You live off the grid and you gain inspiration from the mindsets of your children. What kinds of things have your children discovered?
Yes. So I'm joining you today from a little geodesic dome here in a small forest in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and there's a little interesting story towards that dome and how it became. You know, I gathered a couple of friends. It was, I think, December 1st, 2019. I remember that day because it was raining, you know, like cats and dogs. I think that's the expression you use in England. And it was like, you know, horrible weather, but we were like, you know, 6, 7 people. And we had this, you know, idea that we want to build this structure here in the forest. And so we went about, you know, nobody really had a clue how to do that. We went about building it. And we actually finished it on that day too. The sun came out at the end, which was wonderful, but obviously too late. So we were all kind of like, pouring wet, but we had the structure then built up, and I always wanted to build like a place where guests can stay in the forest and just kind of like, meditate or kind of like be in nature and calm down. But then, 3 months later, the pandemic hit, and so no guests ever visited the dome so far. Or during the pandemic, we had guests after the pandemic, but it was wonderful because what then happened is that my friends joked around when the pandemic started and said, like, Frederik, did you know what's going to happen in the future? Because now you have the perfect work from home setup. You can now, work and live in this, in this structure in your little forest. And it was a good reminder that, we most of the time are actually, more in control of what's going to happen that we think, at least kind of like how we approach the future. And so that was a good reminder for me, and a little funny story around the times back right before the pandemic. But back to your question, Anne, what are some of the things my kids are teaching me? I think we all can learn a lot from our children. I deeply believe that. I think there's the playfulness that they have, and the playfulness approach to everything that is inspiring, but also the curiosity they bring to everything, right? Right from the start, when we all are born, we have that deep curiosity, that human quality that allows us to crawl around the floor, take everything that we see into our hands and into our mouth, so kind of like listen to it and feel it and touch it and taste it and really get to understand, right? And I think that's a quality that I just truly value in children, because that curiosity always allows you to understand, right? Understand things on a deeper level, understand how the world works, understand how other people think, understand how things taste, how things come to be, and so forth. So it's that curiosity that really deeply inspires me every day, that I see in children.
I love the way that children have a completely different take on things to us. I can totally underscore what you've just said. Remember the first time I was on television, in German you say in television, and I told one of my sons, I'm in television, and the next minute he was pulling the television away from the wall to see how I got into it.
Exactly.
Which really makes you think about the way that you talk of things. But Frederik, you wrote in the beginning of your book, and I found that quite fascinating, the future is a canvas of infinite possibilities. What masterpiece will you create? What masterpiece do you want to create, Frederik?
That's a great question. I think that question is on my mind since probably I was born, right? And I think it's a question everybody should have on their minds, because that's the most profound and deep question you can ask yourself every day, right? When you get out, you're like, what masterpiece do I want to create today, right? What is the impact I want to make today? What is the influence I want to have on other people? What is the work I want to do? What is the questions I want to ask myself? And most importantly, how do I want to be, right? Like, how do I want to be today in this world? And I think it's a question that is also driving a little bit of excitement, right? Because if you say, like, you can create a masterpiece, I truly believe it, right? Everybody on this planet has that capability to truly put out the best work every day they can, to really be in this world as a human being, that is, not just kind or like, joyful or all these like, positive words that we use to describe how we want to be, but also just just taking that seriously and taking that as a responsibility that we need to create masterpieces every day as well, right?
Mm.
It's something that we are not just capable of doing, but we also have a responsibility.
Mm.
It's quite interesting, your answer. You said create a masterpiece every day. I think if I asked that question to about another 10 people, they'd be talking about what they'd be doing in 10 years with the masterpiece. Is that the and a very important part of innovation, Frederik? Thinking about the masterpiece of today?
You know, I think when we think about a masterpiece, we always think about probably like these big, you know, inventions and these big things that we want to put out into the world. But it always starts small, right? It always starts with the first big step, right? That you take towards something you want to accomplish, right? And sometimes that could be like, hey, I want to just be a little kinder to everyone, right? And, you know, your first immediate step could be like, hey, I'm going to be, you know, a little bit more kind to my neighbor or like the person I'm living with or, you know, that stranger that I see on the streets, right?
Mm.
And then imagine the masterpiece that you can create over time, just being kind to more and more people and how that spreads around. I think that's a fascinating thought, right? I don't think we have to always confuse and be scared even like that masterpieces have to be something big, right? It can be actually how you show up every day.
Mm.
And a good reminder I received just recently when I was on another one of those silent meditation retreats that you talked about that are mostly the hardest thing, but also the most rewarding thing you can do. So you sit down for, you know, at that it was 7 days, you know, totally quiet. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to look at someone, and so forth. And, you know, not everybody actually finished those 7 days, right? Because it's quite challenging on your mind because most people want to, you know, go home. They feel like, you know, they have responsibilities and your mind tells you like, yeah, you know, what are you doing? Like you're not putting out a masterpiece today, right? If you're just sitting here, but it's the opposite. Like one of the spiritual teachers actually shared with me an interesting insight, and he said, um, you know, don't think that because you're just sitting here, right, for these days, is not helping you to create that masterpiece. Think about what you're not doing today and how helpful that could be in the world. Now think about what you like, let me explain that a little bit more. Think about all the things you're doing each day, right? Sometimes we, you know, we get angry at someone, right? Sometimes even we yell at someone, right? If they're cutting the line in front of us, like with their cars, or like, you know, if they're cutting the line when we're lining up at an event or like in a supermarket, whatever it is, right? Sometimes we get angry at, you know, just randomly at something, right? Because it frustrates us. Sometimes we put pressure on other people, right? Sometimes we argue with a lot of people around us, right? Because we think we have the better idea and so forth. So all of these things actually creates a bad environment, actually an environment that you influence negatively, right? And so think about that. If you're sitting on a cushion and trying to understand how you think and feel, right, you're not doing something bad, right? And that could be actually something good, right? Interestingly, from time to time. So that was an interesting insight from that spiritual teacher that sometimes if we're not, you know, yelling at other people or if we're not angry at other people and we're you know, we're trying to be more kind, it's actually a good thing.
Mm. Frederik, I mean, carefully thinking about something requires time basically, and requires to be in a mood where you are able to think about it and where you are able to, you know, reflect, etc. And I think many of us are lacking time. So we are always in a hustle and we are jumping from one project to another project. And if I would also ask, like, just a normal worker or someone like this, like how often do you sit somewhere and reflect about something? How often will you do this? And I guess many people will say, well, I don't have the time for that. So what is my question? My question is, are we spending time with the wrong things? should we, should we maybe stop to accelerate all the time in our society, and instead, to spend more time on the things which matter, where the answer might be quite obvious, but I guess you know what I mean. So what are your thoughts about that? Because sometimes, maybe last comment on that, I feel that we, as the ones who have the privilege to think about the future and about innovation and transformation, and are in such an inspiring environment, we tend to not understand that there is a very different reality outside of our scope, where things just need to earn money and need to get the things done. So yeah, what do you think about this, Frederik?
It's a wonderful question. And there's probably many answers to that question, but also like there's many more questions we can ask.
Right.
Someone famous, we all know, said like time is relative, right? That's one of these answers, right? There's different cultures where they have like a totally different relationship to time, right?
Yeah.
Where like I'm from Germany, right? I have a specific relationship to time, right? Even specifically when people are late, or when it's considered late, right? But you're raising an interesting point, which brings me to that thought or idea about what we can control, right? Sometimes we feel that we're not in control of anything, right? We feel like our life is in the control of like our employer, or like it's in the control of the government, or it's in the control of like our partner, whatever it is, right? But I think we should ask ourselves like what we can actually control, right? And focusing on that, because if you can take charge and say, I can control how I want to show up today, right? That's totally like what you can decide, right? If you want to give someone a compliment, or if you want to show up a little bit more open to a new idea or a new approach, or a coworker, right? That's totally in your control. And so thinking about what you can control and what you can't control, I think, is the first best step, because I believe that we are in more of control than we actually think. We can actually control most of the things. And when we say we don't have time for that, ask yourself, why is that, right? Is that what I'm focusing on, my time? Is that what I'm focusing my time on? Is that like in my control, or is that out of my control, right? And I came to that belief that we ask ourselves mostly the wrong question, which is, what will the future bring? And that question is a passive question. It's a question that puts you in a position of waiting, puts you in a position of uncertainty. It puts you in a position where your mind is,
Reacting?
anxious.
Is it like only
reacting? Exactly. Yeah. Mostly reacting. Absolutely right. I think we should ask a different question. I think we should ask the question, what future do I want to create, and what can I control to create that future, right? And then we can see which, if we look at our days, right, what is in our control that I can make progress on, and I think that's the right question we should ask ourselves.
But Frederik, I love it what you say, because this is also like a way on how we look on humans. I think it's a perspective which requires, by definition, a lot of optimism. Optimism in the way that we are able to have impact, we are able to change things, and we are able to also create our desired future somehow. It's also something where we say, okay, the individual person can have impact, and even though the challenges look so tremendous, big, and so challenging, we can still have an impact. I'm a little bit, how should I say, at the moment, it feels like we have not so many role models in this direction. We have also a discussion in our society, which might be exactly the other way around, more like reacting, and we need to take things for granted, and it's like it is, and all the crisis, and yeah, not this kind of let's do it, let's change something. I don't know how you see it, but that's a little bit my perception, and I'm also a radical optimist, and it's challenging times for me because yes, there are so many pessimists around me.
Yes, there is this wonderful quote that, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, right? And that's very powerful if you think about it, because if you look at the world pessimistically, right, you will find these things, right? The negative news always find you, right? That's easy, right? They're all around us, right? The headlines that are scaring us, right, every day. But if you want to be optimistic, right, you have to do the work. You have to look harder, right? And there is something optimistic about everything. It just depends on how we view things, how we look at things. And sometimes we have to, zoom out to look at a broader picture, right? Sometimes we have to zoom in, right, to see the positive in things. But it's the work that we can do. And our mind plays always tricks on us, right? Again, like we easily find the negative, right? That's the easy part. We like to blame others. We like to find the negative to that satisfies our mind. But if we do the work and we look at things optimistically, I think that not just gives us hope, but it gives us also agency to do something and to move forward. Coming back to that time question, which still lingers on my mind because it's such a beautiful question, Philip. I think when we use that concept of the future, we mostly think about like a long time horizon, right? We think about the future like 5, 10, 15 years. What I want to do is I want to bring the future close, right? I want to help you to literally learn that what's next is now, right? You decide in this moment with optimism, with openness, with curiosity, with empathy, how the next moment will turn out. That's how you can choose. And, if you just think back, November, to give you a real example that might spur an interesting conversation as well. If you think back November, when was it? 2020, when OpenAI launched ChatGPT, right? Think back on how you felt the day that you were seeing that technology or even using that technology the first time, right? Did it create anxiety for you? Did you feel like, oh no, my job is kind of like, in danger? Did it create a feeling of, excitement where you said like, oh, wow, this is super cool. This is going to help, humanity to do incredible things. What were your feelings, right? And if you were open, right, and optimistic and use that combination, right, you can spot opportunities immediately. You could say like, I'm trying this out, in this field, or I'm trying this out, with that task that I want to do, or I'm experimenting with it, right? So it depends how what I describe as a mind state is in that moment when something happens. It helps you to make a choice, and it gives you more opportunity as well. The same is true for, think back March 16th, it was my son's birthday, 2020, pandemic hit. Same question. How did you feel on that day? Were you like, excited and say like, yes, finally I can work from home and experiment with, a different approach to work and a different work setup and meeting with my, team in a different way, and spent more time at home, right? Or were you like totally in like an anxiety mode, feeling this is going to be the end of the world, right? Again, like openness, optimism, experimentation, and also empathy. Well, like can be described as like what I describe as dimensions of a mind state, can be helpful to approach these situations in a very different way and look at these different situations with a lens that allows you to spot opportunity.
I'm going to jump in there, Frederik, because you said mind state for the very first time. What is the difference between a mind state and a mindset for you?
I don't want to go into like an academic,
Please
discussion
don't.
here and a definition or something like that. But for me, like a mindset feels more long term. It's based on your beliefs, value system, right? It's something that we hold deeply, right? And it's probably also really hard to change, right? It's a word we use, every day in various contexts, right? Everything is a mindset at our times, right? So what I felt is there some other way of looking at what I call like a moment-to-moment perspective, right? Literally like a dynamic lens that is shaped by your current thoughts and feelings that really guides you how we interact with the world. And for me, that's what I consider a mind state, right? That is, it's more short term. It can literally change from moment to moment, right? And you can influence it, right? And I use that because in every moment we have a certain perspective on the world. We look at the world in a certain way, right? Philip described, that we sometimes look optimistically into the world, right? You described yourself as an optimist, Philip. And, that might change, right? In the next moment, you might see some headlines, or you might, be in a situation where that optimism is gone like that, right? So your mind state changes. But what I feel is that we can then train ourselves, we can literally train our mind to spot in every situation, again, that optimism. What is that opportunity that we see? Or we can, change our mind state towards more openness, or use curiosity that we talked about, right? That will guide us and lead us to discover something new, discover something we haven't seen or haven't fully understood. And I think a mind state for me is something that is not a framework. I think life is not a framework, right? The world is not a framework, but it's something dynamic, right? It's something that is very powerful because it really influences your choices. And those choices come from the most deeply human place inside you, right? And for me, that's a super fascinating concept if we think about the future, that we decide the future in the moment, right now. We decide how the future is going to look like.
Frederik, when we were reading your book, I was really, really reminded of my own grandmother, who always said, Anne, if you go into the world, you have to be topsy-turvy, she said. Always look at things from the other side. And you had a wonderful phrase about upside down questions, which was absolutely fascinating. Why do we need upside down questions?
Yes. Can you tell me again, like what your grandmother, how did she describe that?
You have to be topsy-turvy. You have to look at things from the other side. Yeah, topsy-turvy. It was some kind of book protagonist.
Yeah. I love that. Yes. And your grandma is so right, right? If we shift our perspective,
Mhm.
there's always something new that's going to be revealed, right? And we can shift our perspective in so many ways, right? We can shift our perspective by something that I mentioned in the book, which is an exercise that's called upside down, right? You literally try to ask a different question. You mostly ask it literally in the way that it's upside down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about, if you're in a relationship, right? And you ask yourself, how can I improve this relationship? Right? You're at a point where you feel like, there's some struggles, or like, arguments are happening too often, or like, that butterfly is not really flying anymore, right? So you ask yourself, how can I improve this relationship, right, with my partner? Or a relationship with, your family member, or, even like a coworker. And so an upside down question might be, you just, for a minute, you ask yourself, how can I make this relationship worse?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then just sit with that question for a minute and see what comes up. And then you think about, I can make it worse if I spend less time, right, with that person, or if I, always I'm always on my phone, right, when I'm with that person. So I'm going to be more on my phone when I speak to that person, or whatever things come up. And then you can do the check and say like, interesting. I asked myself, how can I make this relationship worse? And I came up with a couple of ideas that I'm actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that the upside down questioning is revealing something that is making your relationship worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can check yourself and say like, okay, if I, spend less time with that partner, or if I'm more on my phone when I speak with that partner, these are the two things I need to actually shift. I need to, spend more time, be less on my phone when I talk to that person. So it's easy things that might reveal itself that you're already doing, but with the upside down questioning, you see that shifting your perspective helps you to look at these things in a very different way.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, something we need to learn, or which is something which needs to be trained also somehow, to emphasize this perspective change. And I think this is a nice bridge to another question I definitely want to ask you, because we are also into training and learning, and training around 700,000 people around the world, and you in person have trained some of the smartest minds in the valley at Google and Stanford. So what have you found to be the most important in training them, and do you learn from them while you provide the trainings to them?
Yes. So again, like I equally learned, as much as I, as I probably could provide as, teachings or things to those folks. And it's, for me, when I, teach at Stanford, or like,
Mhm.
was working with, some of the most brilliant minds,
Mhm.
it's always fascinating that, I walked away learning more than they probably, learned from me. Which doesn't mean that, they didn't get something out of it. But it's the approach that I usually like to take, right? That it's not a teacher-learner relationship. It's like we all equally learn from each other. And what I found is that it actually doesn't matter who you are in the first place, right? Doesn't matter if you're, you know, um, you know, coming from a specific region, or you grown up in a specific way, or you were dressed in a specific way, or you're you're possessing, something special or whatever it is, right? So it really doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter, where you are, right? So I think we have that notion that, you need to be, in a room with lots of whiteboards and post-it notes, in Silicon Valley, surrounded by, other smart people. Not true. But what I found is, what's most interesting is that always when, people had like a breakthrough idea, or they, did something remarkable, or they, created an incredible life for themselves, it's always that it's about how they are, right? And so finding this how in yourself, which means, are you optimistic, right? Are you open? Are you curious? Do you like to experiment? Can you show empathy? Were always those dimensions that I found in people that really help them to do something remarkable. And for me, that's fascinating because for two reasons. The first one is then we can take away all the things that, we always thought like, of course it's that person that came up with that idea because, they grew up, in a rich environment, or, they had access to lots of resources or whatever it was, right? Not an argument. And it doesn't matter where you are. And the most important reason, it's my second one, is you can choose how you are. Every day. You can choose if you're optimistic, if you can spot an opportunity in a situation. You can choose if you're more open to new ideas, new perspectives and so forth. You can choose if you follow your curiosity, ask questions. You can choose if you experiment, try things out. And you can choose if you show empathy, right? To really understand other people's perspectives. And that's always your choice, how you show up. And, that's one of the things that I found in training these incredible minds. And what's, I could maybe go into a story of someone that I actually feature in the book. I have about 14 people that I call the future readies that, are people like you and me, right? They're people like our listeners. They're people who, could live next doors, right? But they're remarkable people in a way that they really show, for example, openness. So one of those is Sarah. Sarah was part of my team at Google. And, in her career, she was probably pushed into 12 different jobs in a time frame of less than 2.5 years. You have to, like if you get to know Sarah, like incredible human being, right? Like, physically fit, she's doing like, many outdoors adventures, right? Super smart, incredibly kind, a wonderful human being. But being pushed in like 12 different jobs because of reorganizations, in this organization, because of team changes, because of manager changes and so forth, really pushed her to the limit. To the limit that she actually needed to go to the hospital, right? She was in the hospital for a long time because her digestion system just didn't work anymore, right? It was just, the body said, stop, I can't handle this anymore, right? And it took her over a year to, to get out of treatment and so forth. And what she managed to do was remarkable, because what she managed to do was she, looked at that question around what can I control here and what can I not control? She learned to control the controllables, right? She learned to control the controllables and to be open to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So what she did is she basically saw a new job now as something that doesn't frustrate you, right? When she was then going into a new job, she was not coming in saying like, oh no, another new job, right? It's going to be frustrating, right? Body's going to, close down again, going to be sick again. She did the opposite. She said, this is great. This allows me to learn something new. I'm open and I show this openness.
Mm-hmm.
So she said to herself, quote, this is not something I thought I'd be doing, but hey, it could lead to something interesting and unexpected. And that radical shift in how you see things, how you think about things, how you think about a new job, right? That with every role change that came afterwards, her openness really helped her to see an opportunity to learn and grow. Her health became extremely well, mentally, physically, emotionally, just, everything was going fine since then. And she became a coach, executive coach, and worked in different roles. And in every role, she really, took that as an opportunity to learn and grow. And her openness really helped her to make that shift.
Mm-hmm.
So it might sound like a small shift in how you approach something, but it can have a tremendous amount of impact on your body, on your mental and emotional well-being. And openness is something where we all say like, okay, I'm slightly open to some things, but if you really are truly open, right? Open arms, right? And say like, hey, I welcome every new opportunity. That radically shifts in what life you're basically building for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a fascinating anecdote! It's just exciting to listen to you, Frederik, and to all your great experiences in this area. Unfortunately, we're running a little bit out of time, so I want to come to our last final questions, which we always ask our dear guests here in the podcast. And I have the privilege to start with the first one, which is actually a very broad question, aiming on your highest priority topics in the next months, so to say. So are there 3 main topics which you will prioritize in the next time?
Yes. There is something I'm personally excited about to try out even more, and that's trying to visualize my future self.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exercise that I'm trying to do every day, just for a couple of minutes, to really understand and trying to empathize with my future self in just a couple of months from today, trying to envision how I want to be in that future, who I want to be surrounded with, what work I want to do, what life I want to live, right? And it's fascinating because when you do that exercise for the first time and you just take a couple of minutes to envision yourself,
yeah,
the picture is very blurry.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my priority is making that picture a little bit more clear. And I can highly recommend for everyone to do that as well. The second one is, I really want to spread that message that the future is shaped by you and how you show up.
Yeah.
It's not in control of anyone else, right? So don't blame a government or like an employer or your partner or whoever, right? You're in control of your future.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're worried about the future, the solution is not looking ahead. It's not like looking at what are the trends, what are the predictions and so forth. It's learning that what's next is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I can help more and more people to understand that and make that a priority, I have that belief that we're going to see a better future happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we give the future back into the hands of humankind, into every single person's hands. And as soon as we do that, not just hands, but also minds and hearts. And as soon as I think we do that, I think we're going to see a better future happening for sure. So that's my two priorities, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Very
What a
strong message.
legacy. What a legacy that is. As Frederik, the last question, the very last question, I'm able to pose to you. If you think about what you'd like to tell people, 3 things that they should learn to be future ready, what would those 3 things be?
Yes. The first one is be radically optimistic. Full stop. We can use our optimism to really motivate us and drive us forward to create that future that we want to see happening, right? Mm. The future is going to be bright. Mm. The second one is don't ask yourself what the future will bring. Ask yourself, what future do I want to create? And I think, Anne, you made a really good point at the beginning. What masterpiece do you want to create? And that masterpiece can start with the first stroke. That could be a small one. It could be like you just showing up a little bit more kind, a little bit more compassionate, empathetic, a little bit more maybe smiling at, you know, at the world, and see how the world will smile back at you. And the third thing is experiment, right? Try things out. We have a tremendous amount of opportunity now to try out technologies, try out different approaches, try out, you know, different ways of living, you know, with nature, with each other. And just before you know, judge and say like, I don't want to do that, or I'm not interested, give it a try, right? Try it out, because that's the only way you can actually decide for yourself, is this something valuable I want to invest in more? And it helps you to learn. So these would be my 3 things. You know, be radically optimistic, experiment as my last thing, and then what masterpiece do you want to create? Ask yourself that question. And the only way to start is to start.
Which is almost a 4th one. Wow. Very strong. Yeah. And what a unique episode today with you, dear Frederik. So was a pleasure talking to you, reflecting with you. Thanks for your time. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Philip. And thank you so much, Annie, for having me. Deeply grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you too, Frederik. That was our conversation today with the man who creates a daily masterpiece, who is radically optimistic, and who says the future starts now. If you want to start, just start. That was our conversation with Dr. Frederik G. Pferdt, Google's first and former Chief Innovation Evangelist, adjunct professor at Stanford University, future optimist, and author of the new book, What's Next is Now. And if you want to send us, dear listeners, a suggestion for someone who's just as fascinating as Frederik's been today, then please send us an email at podcast@i40.de. And with our hashtag DigiCompetence podcast, you can follow what else is happening with us on the podcast, and those people that are with us often they know that Philip and I will be doing somersaults again the next time, when it's time to be digitally competent with Philip Ramin and Anne Kowak.